and welcome to Pursue the Pool, the podcast that is geared towards helping people who are looking for a career change and for those who want to pursue their dreams and start their own business. Now, how do we differ from all of the other inspirational podcasts out there? Well, what we do is we interview people from a range of different industries. So if you want to start your own marketing agency or restaurant or software company, whatever it might be, we have someone specific from that industry to tell you the highs and lows, and most importantly, the truth, but also how to get started and the challenges that they've faced and their story, basically. Now, what we also do is we also interview experts on things that will help you prepare for entrepreneurship, like mindset, money matters, aligning faith and business, mentorship, and many more topics. Now, we are one group, we are one community, and here we have all of the answers. I am your host, Stacey Bevan, and today I have an amazing guest. His name is Rick Culleton, and he is a successful entrepreneur, author, and mindfulness advocate. So first of all, I just want to thank you for joining us, Rick.
For having me, Stacey.
I'm excited. I'm excited for this interview. But look, before I go into the questions, I'm just going to give the audience a little bit of background into what it is that you do. Okay, so you are a successful entrepreneur, author, and mindfulness advocate who has learned firsthand that happiness isn't found in wealth, success, or keeping up with the Joneses. Now, you are the founder of successful businesses, but you have experienced the extremes of life, from being homeless to living the good life. Yet, even at the pinnacle of achievement, you struggle to find lasting happiness. Now, during on your journey with ADHD, accidental sobriety, and personal development, you now empower others to break through burnout, discouragement, and information overload to create meaningful change. Now, you are the author of the highly rated inspirational book called Messed Up Like You. I love that title. And you are currently working on a follow-up that will help readers embrace happiness no matter their circumstances. So you have joined on the perfect day. So I just want to go into all of this, and I want to know about your background. You have got an incredible story and you have been through a lot, but I want to know how it all started. So give me a little bit of your background.
Well, Stacey, I grew up in upstate New York, and as a kid in the 80s, when I got done with school, or school got done with me, well, first I did a small stint in prison, but when I got out, there just wasn't a lot to do there. Work was tough to find, and I ventured out and started looking for another place to live my life, headed down the East Coast. Thought we were going to do some logging, but it was out of season, and eventually ended up in Texas. And that was 1984, and I still call it home today. Yeah. My life changed a great deal there. I was homeless for a short period of time, but in reality, it was a point in time in my life that I have very fond memories of, and I made a lot of good friends. And then from there, I met some really great people who mentored me along the way, and my life took some very interesting twists and turns, and here I am today.
Wow. Okay, so let's just delve in a little bit. So you say you were homeless, so you wasn't working, or you struggled to find employment. Was that because of your past? And then, so how long was you homeless for? Tell me a little bit about that situation.
So it wasn't as dire as you might think. And actually, I did have a job. I was working at a Pizza Hut, and that's where I was living. I was staying inside the Pizza Hut, unknown to almost everyone there, except for one person who became Calvin, who became my best friend. And I would, just at that point, they had a program. It was called Targeted Job Tax Credit. And essentially, they paid me $2 an hour to wash pots and pans, which wasn't really enough to have an apartment or anything, even back in the 80s. So as I was getting going, I just stayed in the Pizza Hut, and it just wasn't that bad. It had a big screen TV. It was projection at the time, and there was all the pizza. And I was 17 or 18 years old, and it had beer on tap. And life was not that bad, to be honest. And when I look back,
that's incredible, actually.
Yes, and I was telling this story the other day. There were a couple of things that happened that made me think back then, and I had learned to shower in the pot sink. It was pretty big, and I'm not a very big guy, so I was able to get in there. But I was just telling someone a story the other day about how the pots were so dirty. The chef there would burn the sauce for the spaghetti all the time, and I'd come back with a paint scraper one day to clean the pots. and they had thought I had a side job, and they were all upset with me that I was working nights or something. I'm like, if you only knew, I'm just hanging out upstairs.
Oh no. And how old was she then?
I was probably almost 18 or had just turned 18.
Okay. And so when you was in, that's a really difficult situation. Obviously, you've got a job, but you said you wasn't earning that much, and you were living where you were working. So, what were the steps, or how did you get out of that situation to go to the next step? Did you get another job, or what was that transition like?
I did. It was a rather pivotal moment. When you think back, there are these things that if you think real hard in your life, there are these events that happen that if they hadn't, your life would have taken a very different turn. And another friend at work named Sayed, he told me he had 6 kids. I never saw them, but he had 3 jobs that I knew, and one of them was Pizza Hut. And he was just a great guy, very funny. Didn't speak a lot of English, but he came to me one day and he says, "Rick, this restaurant up the street is hiring for waiters, and you need to go there to get a job." And I said to Sayed, Sayed, I washed the pots back here, and but they were at times they put me on the floor to take orders for lunch, and it was at Pizza Hut. It was, do you want pepperoni or supreme, and what flavor soda do you want? I mean, it was very
Yeah.
simple order
Yeah.
taking. So he says, "I promise you, you go interview, and they'll give you the job." And Sayed was from the Middle East, and I don't remember exactly where, but I said, "Why don't you get the job?" And he said, "They're not hiring my kind of people, but they'll hire you." And I
Oh,
went to this restaurant, and this cowboy with a big hat on named Sid interviewed me. And the name of the restaurant was Sid's Restaurant. And true to Sayed's words, he hired me on the spot.
oh,
And fast forward, the hostess is now my wife.
oh,
The manager was my father-in-law. The bartender became my mother-in-law. The
oh,
busboy is my brother-in-law. So
wow.
this is a lot of my life came from that one moment in time when Sayed suggested I walk up there and apply to that restaurant, and I worked there for a while.
Oh my gosh. How do you, because it's hard when you're in that situation where, you're homeless, you've got no money coming in, and you're in this situation. How do you keep your mindset right to be like, no, I'm going to make this better, and I'm going to get out of this situation. Like, how was your mindset at that time, and how do you, handle that?
I think it's all in how you look at things. But when you consider the fact that I had grown up in New York, I'm now in Texas, I was in prison, I'm out. So now it's sunny, and I'm free, and everything seemed great. I mean, it was just this was not a time in my life that I look back on with bad memories. I mean, these were great times. I met a lot of people who are still in my life today around that time. And I was really enjoying things. I was having a really good time.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So you've gone into this restaurant now, new job, and then obviously you started getting paid, and then you was able to afford your own place then, or was you still kind of working at the pizza place as well until you got enough money?
I worked at both for a while, and I worked
Okay.
split shifts at the restaurant. It was 11 to 2 and then 5 to 9, which really ended up being 10. And the tips were pretty good. I made enough money within about just a few weeks. I want to say maybe 3 or 4 weeks. I'd already had a little bit of money stashed. I'd done a couple side gigs and made a little extra money. I'd gotten an apartment. And at that point in time, the apartment was actually pretty close to the restaurant where I could walk to work. It was about $300, $330, I think, a month for a small efficiency apartment. So I was making about $60 a day in tips. It wasn't very difficult. I put things together pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, so what happened then? How did you get to the point where you are today? How did that transition come about? So you were in the restaurant, you were working in the restaurant, and you've got your own apartment, and now you're at this point where you've got businesses and you're very successful. So how did you get to this point?
Entrepreneurship, I think, had always been in me. My
Yeah.
father had become an entrepreneur, and I could see the difference that it made in his life. From a very early age, my sister and I would sell fruit on the side of the road and different things. So, I mean, that idea was already instilled in me, and I just started to see opportunities around me in different ways. One of the earliest businesses I had was at a sub shop in Austin called Thundercloud that's still there today, pretty famous place. At the time, they had a few locations, and in there one day as people are waiting around to get their sandwiches, I was thinking, it'd be pretty cool if there was something to do in here and they had the space. So I just asked the manager there, I'm like, would you be all right with me putting a video game or a pinball machine in here? And he said, you know what? I'll talk to the owner. Why don't you come back? And I came back in a couple of days and he says, he thinks it's a good idea. Let's try that. So at the time, I didn't have quite enough money to get the equipment I needed, and I met this man who was selling the machines, and he let me pay for one and gave me the other to pay him later. His name was Bob Haney. He's long since deceased, but he was big in that industry, and
Yeah.
so I started with a location and added some more locations on, and sooner or later, I had about 8 or 9 thunderclouds. It wasn't exactly a living, but it was definitely a good subsidy to what I had going on. All my money came in quarters, and I would split the revenue with the sub shop, and that was really the first established business I had.
Gosh, wow. And then, so where did you go from then?
I've had a lot of little things along the way. Some of them overlapped each other. I had the idea at that point in time to buy scrap gold, and that made me a little bit of money pretty quickly. It
Mhm.
was a little sketchy at times because I'd end up in places I just still didn't know the city very well, and by then I'd bought a
Yeah.
motorcycle.
Hmm.
Before the age of digital scales and all, I'm driving around in November with a triple beam balance stuffed down my jacket. This is a big scale you would use to measure the gold, but it was also used to measure other things. And I'm pulled over by the police one day with a wad of cash, a triple beam balance, and my paperwork to buy gold. And the money and the scale were confiscated. And I felt kind of lucky in the end not to have been incarcerated once more. And that sort of ended that business, but it was a pretty good run for a short period of time, and it taught me a lot of things about people as well.
Wow. So, talk to me about your businesses now, because there's a lot that you do. I mean, in terms of helping people, you've got your book, there's a lot going on. So, where are you now? Talk to me about what it is that you do now and what your focus is now.
Well, I'm kind of all over the place. So I have a company that's 28 years old called discountelectronics.com. We sell refurbished computer equipment in the States. We've been doing
Mhm.
that for a long time. We have some retail stores as well as a website. I own a company that does real estate rehab and rentals. So we'll buy properties, fix them up, and rent them out. It's called First Austin Property. I've been doing that about 20 years. About say 10 years ago, I got into vacation rentals to start with, and that transitioned into hotels. So I have a couple small hotels in Central America now that I'm very fond of. That's one of my favorite things to do, and I
Yeah.
love being down there. And with a little help from my daughter, I got into writing. I think it's been about 4 years ago. The first book came out almost 2 years ago. The second one will be out this year. So I'm all over the map, and that I enjoy very much because I just don't get tired of any one thing. If I get dragged down with one business, I'll just move on to the next. And my inbox is just it's just so different. Every email and every message and every conversation it's about something different, which really helps keep me engaged.
How do you know what to invest in? Has this all happened organically, or is this been like a strategic plan to go into all of these different areas?
It's all been very accidental. I got into the real estate market. We'd bought a small townhome just before we had our first child, and we outgrew that pretty quickly and needed to buy a house. I had another business, Discount Electronics, that was doing well enough that we were able to put a down payment on a home we were building. And at that time, I had been reading Dr. Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad,
Mm,
and it was when it came time to move, there was no doubt that I was going to rent the previous house. There was, I was
yeah.
not going to sell it. That book had really made a mark in my mind, and I was determined that that was going to be the route that I took, and I did. And that was the very first property we had was one that we had lived in, and that's how that area progressed. But they've all been deliberate, although sometimes slightly accidental in nature. And the hotel was something I dreamed of for many years. I would tell my wife, like, someday I'm going to have this hotel, and I'm going to live on top, and I'm going to come down to the lobby and meet the guests in the bar. And although the hotel I have is on the beach and it's only 4 stories tall and there's no elevator, it it wasn't what I had imagined that I was,
Yeah.
manifesting the entire time. I'd imagined this tower and maybe it was in Manhattan, but I was still so thrilled that when it came to be that, I still have the hotel. I don't live there anymore, but I love being there and I love the people of Costa Rica. So that's been a very big part of what I do. And writing, if I don't know that I would have ever taken that on if I'd known how involved it was. I always had this
Yeah.
idea like I'd write a book, I'd publish it, and people would read it. I had absolutely no idea how much work was involved and how much more there is than just writing a book and how many people it takes. The team that we have is incredible. And I enjoy that process very much now, too.
Mm. And so when you were going into these different businesses, did you ever like have self-doubt and fear of going into an area? And some of these areas you said you just kind of went into and they seem very different. So some people get kind of imposter syndrome because they're like, oh, I don't know this market or this industry and oh, am I right for this? Like, how did you get that self-doubt and fear? Like, is this going to work? I don't really know the area, or did you get any?
Stacey, I think everybody has that. And
Yeah.
I've heard other people say this. When you have one successful business, you'll have this mindset of I got lucky. Like this wasn't really me. I couldn't
Oh,
do this again. And you have this fear that lives in the back of you. Like if this business fails, if I screw this up, I'm done. I'll never be able to recreate this. That will start to dissipate when you get a couple more under your belt. Now, to perpetuate that thought, I had some failed businesses. I had many failed businesses, so many more failed businesses than I did successful ones, and that will help perpetuate that mole in the back of your mind eating away at you. And then once you get a couple under your belt, you're like, hey, you know what? I really do sort of have a knack for this, and that I'll get it figured out. But I can remember so many times before I had the hotel, I had bought a house in Costa Rica, the very first property I'd ever bought outside the United States. It was a big property on a mountain, and I'm in the middle of a construction project. I barely speak Spanish. Banking in Central America was just a mystery to me, and everything was a challenge. And I mean everything. Getting materials, communicating with the laborers. I made so many mistakes. And I can remember sitting in the living room of this house, this mansion on the mountain, thinking, if someone would come and give me my money back today, I would fly home and never come back. I was just so, and then a few days later, it's like, okay, not all of my money. If they give me some of my money back, I would leave.
oh,
And fast forward, that was the launching pad for everything that I did down there in Costa Rica. And those are the types of things you look back on later on. Is that okay, this job is challenging, but do you remember the time you were crying in the living room that you weren't going to be able to finish this thing, and you got that one done? So this is a piece of cake. And the things that have happened to me in my life, they're all stepping stones, and they're all things that you can look back on. And we all have these things. When you're looking for strength, you can often look inside yourself and see the things that you have done. Sometimes you're going to need to think really hard. What was your deepest, darkest moment? And how did you get through that? Or just the fact that you did get through it is just that brings you the strength to get through the next thing. And, maybe this next one is a little bit tougher, and you build on that and you build on, and in time, you can get to a point where you feel indestructible.
would you say that the first business is comes with a lot more fear and doubt than the businesses after?
I don't think that there was a lot of fear in the first business because I was so engaged with it. It was all I was doing. I was my only
Yeah.
employee for a little while. I'm there day and night, and there's not
Mm-hmm.
time to reflect and worry. You're just going and going and going, and I mean, it's like burning the ships when you go to conquer a small island. So I mean, when you show up, there's no way out. I had no other options. There was no backup plan. I didn't have a trust fund or a bank account. So
Yeah.
there, fear at that point doesn't really exist, or at least it didn't for me. It was just go and do this and keep doing it. And I think that that's how a lot of entrepreneurs start. You read some of the success stories. Most of the really successful people that you run into in business probably have ADHD. There's a pretty good chance of that to start with, and they more than likely didn't come from a soft background.
Yeah, yeah. So when it comes to that, there wasn't really the option of you going into employment. You just saw it as this is my only kind of option, you know. And I think that's a good way to look at it, because I think if you do have options, it can kind of not stop you, but, you know, you're more motivated. You have to make this work, right? So I think that's a strong view to have.
It is, at that point in time when I started my first big company was In Touch Telecom, and it was pagers, it gives you an idea just how long ago that was. And when, at that point, I'm pretty deep into this. I don't really have enough money to get it completely off the ground. I'm scrounging, doing anything I can to bring the money into that market. But the idea was there's nothing else backing me up. My formal education ended at age 17, and I went from there to prison. I didn't have a lot of tangible skills. I didn't, my resume probably would not have looked too good. So, it's like, this is where I'm going, and there's no other route. So when that is the only option, you just see ways within that path to make it work. And you're not really looking out on the sides for other exits or escape hatches, because there aren't any.
Do you think, because at the time you've got children now, and a lot of people that write into me, they're in a position where, they want to start a business now, and they've got children and they're in a job, and they want to make that transition and just start their business. But now they've got, responsibility, and, so they're struggling to make that transition. And some people say, oh, just go for it. But you can't. You've got kids, you've got a family to support. Like, if you was in that situation now, how do you think you would handle it? What do you think would be your kind of thinking?
Well, when I started business, I didn't have children, and I kind of putzed around. I had car dealerships and different things, and I didn't make any money. As a matter of fact, I filed bankruptcy. And it was about the time that it was even before we had our first child. My wife was pregnant. We'd made an agreement that she was going to stop working. She worked the day she had our son, and that night she gave birth and didn't go back to work. And this was a real game changer for me, because I can be homeless and live in a car. I'm that kind of guy. I'll go pitch a tent, and I'll probably still be happy at this point. Yeah. But I can't be homeless with a kid. And I this really got my attention and my focus. And I didn't just become more focused on the business, but I became more focused on my financial well-being outside of the business and what I did with the money that I made. Mm-hmm. So if I had made a few bucks beforehand, I might have, gone out to dinner and spent the money, lavishly, and pretended I was something I wasn't. But when kids were on the horizon and I start to see that lump in my wife's stomach, it's like, my mindset changed immediately. And the children, just the idea of having children made me a much better business person, because now I'm taking care of others. And then that matures into taking care of your employees. And there's as much as your own children are obviously so important, when you have so many lives in the balance. And in the beginning, I'd lie awake wondering, how am I going to make payroll this week? Because now you've got other people and their children at stake.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you it? Because it's difficult when people are in that position and they're kind of like, look, I do want to make that jump, and they're trying to do things on the side, and then they're trying to bootstrap a business. Did you bootstrap all of your businesses, or did you get any investors?
Everything was bootstrapped, and I don't really believe in that business model. And I know that a lot of people out there, get the money first, then we'll become profitable. Yeah. It doesn't really register with me. A business needs to make money. And, I kind of chuckle every time I see another one of these public companies just kind of fade away. It's like, here, somebody gave you hundreds of millions of dollars and you still couldn't make any money. Well, that's probably why you couldn't make any money, because there wasn't a need to make any money. It was already it's like doing everything in reverse. Like, here's the money first. Now go make some. Whereas if when you don't have any money, you think completely differently. Every dollar matters. You need to become profitable right away. Nearly every business I had generated revenue and profits right out of the chute. They didn't always generate enough, but they were profitable. They had gross revenue right out the door. And I couldn't imagine running a business any other way.
Do you take risks in the sense of, let's say if you had a bit of savings, is that something that, you would use to just put all in your business if you're bootstrapping, and go all in, and then, because you've got in your mindset that this is going to work and you're going to make that money back anyway. So there's people that have wrote in that have like, I've got these savings, but I don't know whether to use the savings and go all in. I'm working, but, go all in and then, get the business going to make that money quicker. Or it's like, I'll just stay and take my time and pay with the job and keep the savings. But some people are like, no, use that savings, go all in, you're going to make it back. What is your take on that?
Well, I had an interesting experience in the mid '90s. I made a bit of money. I had a company called In Touch Telecom, and I had made a considerable sum of money, which I put in the stock market. And I was transitioning from In Touch Telecom to Discount Electronics. The two are open at the same time, and I was separating them at that point in time. And I lost nearly everything I had in the '99 crash. The dot-com bust, and I mean, like, nearly everything. And as I'm watching that money just vanish, and I'm trying to decide what to do as I'm getting out of In Touch Telecom and into Discount Electronics, I had lost 90% of everything I had. And I just grabbed the last bit of money that was in that stock account. And I said, I had lost the hope that I was ever going to regain anything. Like this, I'm never going to get anything back. Companies were filing bankruptcy and closing. And, so I grabbed the last bit of money I had, and I said, I'm all in with Discount Electronics. And I used that money to buy inventory and leveraged it a bit. So I bought about 3 times the amount of inventory that I'd had cash for. And yeah, so I've had more at that point. I certainly had a lot more faith in myself than I did any other investment tool. And yes, sometimes you do need to go all in, and you need to be careful, when you're doing that, especially, luckily for me, I was always losing my own money. And I didn't, my family didn't, have money to give me to go start a business. And like I said, I didn't have a trust fund, and I wasn't borrowing from in-laws. So I think that would be a pretty sticky situation when you get into other people's money, because now you've got to make decisions about how you're going to, do you jump out early and give them back as much as you can if you're starting to lose money? Whereas if it's your own, you're probably going to stay in there to the bitter end and sort it out.
It's true. It's true. So how do you stay because you've had so many highs and lows, and like you say, you've lost money and businesses have failed and they've been successful, but how do you stay motivated? Like, I've just got to keep going, because it's difficult. Do you have business mentors, or is it just yourself and the way that you've kind of trained your mindset? And how do you do that?
Well, I'm excited about every day. And I think that that's a big part of it. You've got to hit, there have been so many times when I wake up in the morning and, I look back over time and like I was in a really bad spot and I wasn't feeling great, and something incredible happens and it just changes everything. And there's so many times and to different degrees, where something just turns everything around. And you have to be open to that. And the only way you can be is to start every day fresh and look at, like, what are my opportunities today? Not what baggage am I carrying from yesterday, but what can I go out and find today that, or what's going to find me? And I definitely had mentors. There were 3 that come to mind, 3 men that were all similar in age, one of which is still alive today. And he and I are still very good friends. And he was really my ethics coach as much as anything else. We were in the car business together, and he had so many one-liners he'd give me that really stuck with me. And as a car dealer, I remember one of my favorites. He said, Rick, a car dealer should never lie, cheat, or steal unless absolutely necessary. And Ron had so many things that stuck with me. And one day we were at his 50th birthday party, and he looked at me and said, if I had any idea I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. And that stuck with me too. And I'm living the same life you are. And I'm, 20 some years younger than he is. I'm like, I'm already seeing it. Like, this lifestyle is not going to last long. And so I straightened my health out at that point in time, but he had a lot of things like that. And he always got me to do the right thing. And my father was one of them, true inspiration. He was someone who worked at a Ford dealership for years and was met with an opportunity to become an entrepreneur and embraced it. And the story goes that he would come home tired and dirty and angry after he'd worked at the Ford dealership. And when he went out on his own, he would come home tired, dirty, and happy. And I saw the change. And one night at the dinner table, he said, "You'll never be happy working for somebody else." And it wasn't just the words coming out of his mouth. I'd seen it. You know, I was a very young child. I'm 12 at the time, but looking at this man and seeing the difference, he was a different person. And I think that had a lot to do with the path that I took. And my third mentor was someone, I still use this today, but he and I did a lot of business together. He's the reason I'm in Costa Rica now. He's long since deceased. He wasn't a nice man. And he taught me some business things and some business sense and financials. But what I learned from him more than anything else was what I didn't want to be. And he would, at every opportunity, use a person for whatever he could gain. And you could see he would even sort of brag about it sometimes. Big womanizer, just someone who wanted to look at every relationship as what he could squeeze out of it. And at that time, during the time I was doing business with him, I was a big Dr. Covey fan, and I'm learning all about win-win, and I'm like, this isn't really aligning with what I'm learning or feeling is the right thing. And still today, I'll see traits in other people that I don't want, and then I'll examine myself, and I'll see, if you see somebody with some behavior that you think this is just not the way a person should act, and I'll take another look at my own personality. Like, do I have any of these traits? If I do, I want to strip them out of there, and that's a really good way to learn about, it's almost like a mirror of sorts. You see, when you see these things, you have to really stop and think, do I do some of that?
Yeah. And in terms of like preparing your mindset, is it also, a lot of people say like it's important to have the right people around you and be in the right place and so on. Would you say that's been the same for you, to have the kind of right people? And did you purposefully make sure that you had the right people surrounding you?
The people are the only thing that really matters. You can't do this without the right folks.
Yeah.
I don't know that I selected them. I think a lot of them picked me, and it just happened naturally over time. I'm stepping down as CEO of Discount Electronics in about 2 weeks, and my successor is already there. And he brought a stat to me just the other day. He said, we got a 28-year-old company. He said, the average person working here has been here 7 years and 7 months. And I was like, wow, that's a long time. And he goes, that's an incredibly long time. And, the diversity of people we have, some of them by nature, we're in retail, tend to have a higher churn rate. And he says, you've got people in the stores that have been there well over a decade, all over the place. And I was like, wow, that's kind of cool, And, I know so many of their families, and many of them met at work and, got married to people they met while they were working there. Some married other employees, and they've had children. And, so that's a really enjoyable part of business. But with that, as again, I said earlier, it comes to responsibility, because now I'm responsible for them and their children and their mortgage. And
it's a lot. It's a lot. So how do you grow these businesses? How do you take them from the next level to the next level? So you start these businesses, but growing them is a bit different. How do you scale these businesses, or how have you scaled some of your most successful businesses?
So I'm not really good at scaling. That's not my forte at all. Now, the retail stores with Discount Electronics, we had 1, grew to 10, and now we've scaled back to 2 as we've become more online. And that business grew. But I turned down several opportunities to go public or to take venture capital money and that type of stuff. I don't, I know that word is very popular, scale. I guess personally, I scale with multiple income streams and multiple businesses, but I'm happy with the size of everything. I've decided that I buy a little bit of real estate here and there, but I'm happy with the size of that company now, and it's manageable. I'm happy with the hotels. I have 2. I don't want any more. And, Discount Electronics now has 28 people working there. I know them. I like that size. And you get to a point where enough is enough. And why do they need to be bigger? And granted, there is a point in time where you do need to scale a business. You've got to get it to profitability, and you've got to get it to a point that is sustainable. But beyond that, do you really need to be looking for the buyout? And I
Yeah.
have friends in my industry, in the computer industry, several who have sold out, and they get big paydays and they come back for more later on. Okay, so you got the big fat check, maybe you squandered it, maybe that's not what maybe money's not what you were really
Yeah.
after.
Not fulfilling.
So I'd encourage anybody, when you get to that point, think about this. Is this really what you want? Because so
Mm.
much of what we do in business is what we think is the right thing to do because other people are doing that. And I find this trap in marketing all the time. Just because
Yeah.
someone else goes that route doesn't mean it's the right route for you.
Yeah.
And I will never have a publicly traded company. I will never take any venture capital money.
Yeah.
It's just not why I'm here.
No, no. And so, if like, because there's a lot of entrepreneurs, and at the beginning, they have so many different ideas, and they don't know, they're either thinking, okay, I'm going to try all of these ideas that I have at the same time. Would you advise no, just to go for one idea, get that working, and then go for the rest? Or because you're in a lot of different ones. So, how did you, and there's a lot of ideas happening. How do you know which ones to focus on first, or should you try it all at the same time and see which one shows sign of, profitability?
The first thing they need to do is grab my first book, Messed Up Like You, and read that because that's life of an entrepreneur who has ADHD. And until you
Oh,
harness
yeah.
that power, those ideas are problematic. I was opening businesses. One day I went to Florence and I fell in love with this coffee shop and I flew back to Texas and I duplicated it. And I can't tell you how much money I lost on this whole ordeal. And
What?
I did a number of those things where I would just spur the moment. I'll have an idea, and tomorrow it's a business, and I would open them up. They're countless. I wanted a boat rental company at one point in time, but I couldn't get any lakefront property. So I opened a place called By the Day Boat Rental, and we rented trucks so they could tow the boats to the lake. And I mean, just crazy, crazy things like this that I did over and over again. And some of them survived for a while, and others didn't. The coffee shop was open for 6 days. And I don't even want to tell you how much money I lost over that deal.
Oh my
So that is
gosh.
why you need to stay focused. And that's a big part of what my first book was about is being an entrepreneur with ADHD because it's an incredible power. You have all of these ideas all of the time. And
Yeah.
that's why so many really good CEOs and entrepreneurs have ADHD. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's a power you need to learn to harness because you my motto is just because I can doesn't mean I should. And I
Yeah.
take a real break. I have several business ideas in the back of my mind right now. And the fact that I'm stepping down as CEO of Discount Electronics is going to free up a little bit of time. And I'm considering what it is that I want to do next. And it's going to have to be something different than I've done. I don't want to, any variation of anything. I've done restaurants and bars and hotels and retail. So I'm going to need to pick something different, but I've learned to take the time to react and think about it because one, you need to have your other businesses established and not demanding of your time. All you're going to do is take away from what the first business needs from you, and your creativity and your
Mm.
time. And you spread yourself too thin, and then they both fail. And I've been down that road many times, where I'll have one that's doing okay, and then I'll go open two more, and they will both fail in the short term. And then I'll have to run back and pump up the first one to get back on par to work. The creativity that comes with ADHD can be it's a double-edged sword.
Uh, is there anything that you notice with the businesses that are successful as opposed to the businesses that are not? Like, are some of them more, serving of others, or are some of them more a passion of yours, so the work better? Is there any kind of logic to the different types of businesses and what's successful and what's not?
Well, I always have believed that in order to have a successful business, you need to solve a problem. And that the bigger the problem is that you solve, the more successful the business will be.
Mm.
So, Discount Electronics sells refurbished computers at really cheap prices. So we solve a number of problems. We keep computers out of the landfill. And at the time I opened the company in the 90s, computers were incredibly expensive. So we provided computers and still do to people who may not be able to afford them otherwise, and primarily to small businesses that need to scale up. So
Mm.
we can reduce their expenses dramatically. And, so you're solving a series of problems at one time. The more problems you solve, the bigger the problems are, the more successful your businesses have to be. And even, the real estate business I'm in, when I set out, it was to create affordable housing. The housing prices in Austin were rising quickly. And, I had discovered several ways and created some to keep the prices of the rent down, which kept the properties extremely full. So I solved the problem of affordable housing to the normal average everyday person, not people that aren't government subsidies, but just the person working. And by doing so, I was rewarded with incredible occupancy rates. The banks would comment all the time, like, we've never seen occupancy rates like yours. And it was done by, I just came up with some systems that allowed me to rent at a lower rate, but still collect enough in rent that it worked out. But those are always like if you solve a problem. And same when I went to Costa Rica, there was a shortage of housing at that time. There were a lot of people who wanted to go and not a lot of places to stay. And although I started with Airbnb and moved into hotels, even when I opened the hotel, there weren't any really nice beachfront hotels. They were all kind of like shabby. I thought it'd be really nice to have, it's a surf town, but what if we had one really nice hotel? And the place I opened up, Hotel Hako, I mean, it's incredible. And the people are what make the difference. It's a beautiful property on a pristine part of the Pacific Ocean, but it's also got an incredible staff. And when you read the reviews, they'll mention the beautiful views and the balconies and stuff, but what you see over and over again are the employees' names. And then they name the employees over and over and over again because it's the people. That's what
Yeah.
really matters.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned happiness, and it's an important part, and you've gone through certain stages where, you do teach people as well about, finding this happiness. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I was a very typical entrepreneur. I put everything in. We would brag about how little we slept. My opening line was, there's two types of people in the world: those who have lied awake all night wondering how they're going to make payroll, and those who haven't. And I learned to live with an incredible amount of anxiety. So much so that it was not in the very distant past where I would wake up in the morning shaking so bad that I would need to jump out of bed because the longer I laid there, the worse it would get. And it was with me all of the time. I drank a lot for my entire life. 38 years, I drank every day except for 2 days that I took my son on a Boy Scout campout. Yeah. So I was self-medicating and I would try to shut down at the end of the day. And I was chasing all of these dreams, and I had somehow managed to cross the finish line. I'm at a point where I have homes all over the world. I've got any kind of car that I could want. All of the things that I had associated with success were there. I had an incredible family. I'd married my prom date. My kids were amazing. And yet there was something there. It's like, the thought was, if I'm not happy, nobody could be happy because I've got everything I ever wanted. The rest of the world must be miserable, and I lived with this way for a while. And one day I received an email from a woman by the name of Julie Hutchinson, who runs a program called Core Performance. And it stated something like, would you like to wake up happy every day? And at that time I was like, geez, is that even possible? Of course. And yeah. I answered the email, and it varies, the universe works in weird ways. Yeah. Julie ended up being the sister of two men that I knew very well. One had been a friend of mine for a long time. Another had worked as the CEO for one of my companies. And I had traveled to Europe with her niece. And I'm like, wow, okay, so there's a real trust factor here because she's got a really, really good family. And so I get very involved with this program, and I got tricked into meditation, and we would call them breathing exercises. And yeah. I'm very naive in some ways. And it was a month in before I even started to realize that I was meditating, and it was life changing. And then in the beginning of this process, we talked about the alcohol, and she said something like, Rick, you're going to find a point in time where you don't even need the alcohol anymore. And I said, well, wait here. I'm perfectly happy with my drinking. Let's just leave that off the table, and we'll work on these other things. And lo and behold, 2 months into the program, I'm in Manhattan in my apartment one day, and I take every bit of liquor and I throw it down the trash chute. I've never had a drink since. And I kind of walked into that backwards too, because I think a lot of times people give up alcohol in an effort to find happiness, but it was all for me, it was, what is this giving me anymore? I don't really need it. And
Yeah.
then that amplified everything. And it's been the last couple years of my life have been a real journey. When I look back, everything on the outside is still the same.
Yeah.
I still have the same companies, I have the same family, I live in the same places. And yet I am the happiest I have ever been. And
Mm.
it's just, it all comes from inside. And that's what this next book is about. And if
Yeah.
you go to mymorningstack.com, we already have a lot of information there, but this first book, or I say the first book in the series, my second book, is about becoming happy through your morning routine. And I don't get in too much about not using alcohol, but it's more about setting the foundation for your day in the morning. And it's made a tremendous amount of difference in my life. The things that I do in the morning, and it's eye-opening. And it's
Yeah.
just incredible how happy you can be. And all of the things that happened to me in my life, when I look back and all the events that I witnessed, and how happy the people in Costa Rica are. And these people have less than any other culture I've experienced personally. And yet
Yeah.
they're the happiest people. And it's easy to see why. They live a very
Yeah.
simple life. They're very family orientated, pura vida. It's just, I'm learning to live a lot of that.
Yeah.
And the anxiety is gone. And for the first time in my life, I'm really happy, and maybe it's not the first time, but it's the first time in a long time that I can say that I am really and truly happy, and it's been sustainable.
That's incredible. I mean, I stopped drinking as well like 3 years ago, and I feel like a completely different person, And I don't think I would ever have been able to do the podcast or anything if I was still drinking. And something was telling me that unless you give this up, I won't give you this. So I went through the same experience. But do you think like, because I've heard it's 80% mindset and 20% skills. Would you say that it's made you stronger as an entrepreneur or better or make better decisions?
It's made me a better everything. It's made me a better husband. It's made me a better father. It's made me a better boss. Although my employees have been around a long time and they'll probably have nice things to say about me, I can guarantee you that they like the new Rick a lot better than the old one.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
John Mayer actually explained this better than anybody I had ever heard, and he quit drinking several years ago, and he said, when I quit drinking, my emotional line went from this to more like this, and he said at the
yeah,
beginning it was kind of a little low, and then
yeah.
over time you bring this layer up, and it's that lack of highs and lows and the all of the anxiety and depression and all
Mm.
of those things that made me reactive. And as an entrepreneur, I can't tell you how many thousands of emails or conversations that I wished I could have retracted. It's like, I really reacted to that and I shouldn't have. And
Yeah.
they've even invented some tools like that where you can send emails and then unsend them for a period of time because of things like that. And when you stop drinking, and I don't want to focus on alcohol consumption, but when the changes that happened in my life and when I became a happier person, um, I reflect better and I communicate better and I take my time, and I'm sure that I have made life more, as much as I enjoy my life more now. I'm sure
Yeah.
everyone around me enjoys their lives more. I've even noticed a difference in how my children interact with me, and that they're less defensive and standoffish because I am less judgmental. And there's just
Mm.
so much in my, and all of the experiences I've had are still there, and I'm still the same person. It's just that filter between what's back there and what comes out that has improved tremendously.
Yeah, yeah, it makes an incredible difference. But the way you're explaining it is incredible. And you talk about, and I just want to touch on this, but there's a mention of embracing imperfections. So, what exactly do you mean by that? Is this with the alcohol, or is this any imperfections that you have? It's a way that we should embrace those imperfections and not focus on them as a negative thing, so to speak.
Well, for me, it's in two ways. One is, I learned to live with my own idiosyncrasies. I know that, and I joke with my wife about this all the time. I have such a routine in the morning. Like if any other person walked in this house, they'd think that I needed help. I mean, there would be absolutely no doubt. Like, what is this guy doing? And I have a very strict routine that has evolved over time. So
Oh,
as far as imperfections go, that could be seen as a big one from the outside. To me, it's what I need to make life what it is, and I enjoy it. But
mhm.
then there are the imperfections that I don't want in my life. And those are the ones when I oftentimes see in other people and then I take a really close look at myself. Like, am I doing any of this? Do I exhibit any of this behavior? And there are times where it's like, I think I do a little bit of that. Maybe I can use this example as a tool to clean my act up a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah. No, brilliant. So, look, we're coming to the end of the interview, but before we finish, I do want to ask you to if you could give our entrepreneurs that are watching, some of I know you've got an amazing book, so talk a little bit about what they can learn from the book as well. But if you could give them some advice in terms of, they've got a lot of fear or self doubt, they want to start their own business, they don't know where to start. Some of them are in a position where, they're working a 9 to 5 and they've got responsibilities. So what advice would you give people that do want to start a business, but they're just not sure where to start and they do have all of this fear and self-doubt? Is there, mental stuff that they should work on first? Or what would you advise?
If I was going to start with somebody from scratch who wasn't an entrepreneur and they wanted to create their own business, the very first thing I would tell them is to grab a piece of paper and a pen that you take with you everywhere. And every time you experience something in your life that is less than desirable, when you see a problem, I don't care what if you think the food containers in the grocery stores don't open and close properly, or if you think the public transportation in your town doesn't work right, whatever it is that is a problem that other people are going to be experiencing, start writing these things down. Make notice of the things that aren't working correctly. And what I'm trying to prevent here is that, people want to open a business like, oh, I'd love to have a coffee shop or a bar. And I've done that. I've done both. I've had a coffee shop and a bar. Those are the worst business ideas you can have. There are so many great coffee shops and so many great bars. You are not solving any problems, right? So
Mm,
your odds of success, your odds of creating a Starbucks are slim, fat, and none. And I can tell you
yeah.
that firsthand. So first off, make that list of all of the things that you encounter. What if it takes months? That's fine. Write them down, analyze them, think about how you could solve those problems. What kind of mastermind can you put together to work on these issues? And is it a business that you would enjoy? So you might see a problem like, oh, whatever, this is a problem, but it's not anything I'm interested in, and scratch it off the list. And what you're going to end up with when you get done are a list of problems that you might enjoy solving. And when you get somewhere through this process, you're going to have the aha moment like, wow, I could really solve this problem. I could do some good and I could make some money and I'd have a great time doing it.
Wow.
Then you've got the winner, right?
Yeah.
So then it may be three and you have to narrow it down. Maybe you need to talk to some people and say, what is, then how much money do these things take? Because, you can have maybe I can put men on the moon and recolonize, but I'm not Elon Musk and I don't have billions of dollars,
Yeah.
so that's not going to work. You got to come up with something that works inside the what you're working with financially. And then to address the second part of this, there is nothing wrong with that fear at all.
Mm,
It's healthy. You need
yeah.
to have it. If you don't have that fear, you're probably going to end disastrously. That's the checks and balances. This is like, am I doing the right thing? Is this going to work? Okay,
Yeah.
you don't want to ruminate on that day in and day out, all day, every day. You need to focus on the business, but there is nothing wrong with some healthy fear.
Yeah. And just quickly on one more thing, those that have tried and have failed, some people get scared to try again because they think, oh, I failed, I'm never going to make it. Like, what advice would you give to those people?
Wow. Yeah. I had so many failures before I had a success. I have no pity for you, but I'm going to tell you this, that you are so much more prepared for success than the guy who hasn't failed yet. And you have to have so many failures. And it's not just that you have to have a complete business failure. That's very likely. I
Mm,
had 20. That's fine. You're going to have failures within the business that succeeds. Those are also important. It's not just like a black and white, that was a failure, this was a success. Inside the business that I have today, there were many, many failures. And if you look at my business model today, it doesn't look anything like it did. In an interview a little while ago, we were talking about when I opened this store, we had a web page. You couldn't even place an order online. You'd mail me a check and we would get bounce checks and all. I mean, the business model has changed dramatically and looks nothing like it did. So you're always evolving and you're always going to find parts of the business. Maybe there was something that was successful at one point in time that fails now, and you have to be ready to make those changes and not think that just because you don't want to be of the mindset that this worked once, it's going to work forever, or get too committed to your decisions. If you make a decision in business and then you realize that it was the wrong decision, maybe the data changes, maybe you misinterpreted the data for whatever reason, move on. As a prime example, I lost a ton of money on that coffee shop. It was open 6 days. When I realized I had made a mistake, what's the most valuable resource I have is myself and my time. And that's true with everyone out there. So when you realize that you're headed down the road, you're certain it's the wrong path, not just that you run into an obstacle and this is tougher than you thought, but that this is a mistake, change direction. Make adjustments and reanalyze the data and move on, because you can't get that time back. Now, you're going to learn a lot from these things. And in the moment when I was younger, they would be very distressful. Like, oh, I failed again. I just suck, and it took a long time before I would start to reflect on those moments. And then I would be like, oh, don't do that again. Remember what happened the last time you did that? Don't jump to that conclusion. And then it evolves, I'm going to be 59 in a couple of weeks, and I've been in business since I was a teenager. Now, after all these years, I'm able to learn in the moment. So I don't even need, like, when a mistake happens, the education just kind of comes right with it. I can see the lesson in the moment, where before I didn't want to learn it at all. Then I got to a point where I would need to reflect on it years in the future to look back and go, oh, yes, and sometimes I'll learn the same lesson 3 and 4 times.
Wow. But you learn.
I hope. Some of them I keep learning.
Look, you have been fantastic. The advice that you've given has been incredible. You're going to help a lot of people. And just on your book, where can people get your book?
Well, you can find Messed Up Like You is on Amazon and a variety of other, any bookstore. The new book is still untitled, but you can get more information about it at mymorningstack.com. If you sign up for the newsletter, we'll send you a free copy of Messed Up Like You, and you can help us throughout the process. As I think we're going to be giving previews of some of the early chapters to people who sign up, and a weekly email. And this is really where my focus is now. Is it's more in the mindfulness and helping people, and if that's through entrepreneurship, that's great. But even if you're not an entrepreneur, if you're just looking to have a happier life, I've probably got something that'll interest you.
Yeah, definitely. You've got all the experience as well. So no, that sounds incredible. I'm going to sign up for one for myself as well. But thank you again. Look, you have been incredible. So thank you so much for doing this interview. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you, Stacey. It's made a great start to my day.
Oh, yeah. Well, it is morning for you, isn't it? Like, very early. Thank you.
Yeah, I still have one addiction left. I'm going back to the espresso machine.
Oh, that's all right. Well, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.